like that, you know. I mean, well, I can dig it. When it gets really cold, I'm happy it's warm, but this when things feel strange, you're wondering maybe there is something to the changes. I mean, I'm certainly not a climate change dogmatist or anything like that, but I think there is changes that happen in climates over time. And,
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. I was just chatting with Kurt about that yesterday. I have some ideas that I would like to run by you at some point, but it looks like Alex's icon
Hey,
came up.
if you guys go to your search and look up Walter Bosley
Okay.
okay.
and look for the search results, and there's one that has his face on it with glasses, and it's
Sure.
and if you add him as a contact, I'm just wondering if maybe that will help the situation.
Okay.
Sure.
Now I'm gonna try to add him again.
See if I can search.
Oh, this is promising. I think we've got
Let me
him.
try to do this again. Walter.
Yeah, that did it. I see all your names.
We got it. Success.
Okay. Who would have thought something that simple?
Just always unplug it, and plug it back in.
Yeah.
Harsh language.
Alex thought of it. That's right.
Okay, well, here we all are. I'm Alex. You guys can introduce yourselves.
Hey, Walter. I'm Dennis. Dennis Cook.
Hey, Dennis.
And Walter, I'm S.J. Anderson.
Hello, S.J.
Hey, how you doing?
And
Good.
yeah, we are. I guess we wanted to lead with this because today is December 2nd, and that is. I remember last year was the 100th anniversary of the San Bernardino working, and
one of the deaths. Yes.
One of the deaths. Okay, and last year we did a podcast either on this day or around the same time where we discussed your talking about that in the San Bernardino shooting. So we thought that was interesting synchronicity that here we are again on the 101st.
The video that I did on YouTube where I pointed out the synchronicities.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And this
because I had read your first Empire of the Wheel book, and it was like hours before our conversation scheduled for that night that I had came across that information about that, and so it became a central point of our conversation that night. So, but yeah, and I say I'm a huge fan of your work, so I'm really happy to
thank you.
have you here with us, and yeah.
Well, if you got through the first book, then that's quite an accomplishment in itself. The first book is the one that sometimes trips a few people up. For the most part, most people don't say anything about it, but that first one is the one that just kind of throws a bunch of stuff at the reader, and so
I have to confess I have a similar experience where I got that book and I started reading it, and I think I really wanted to read the second one. It's Friends from Sonora, but I wanted to read that one first, so I was kind of impatient, and I ended up not finishing it. But I plan to go back to it.
Well, if it's any consolation, I do intend to go back to it and do a little editorial revision on it to kind of clean up the clunkiness, because it does indeed have some clunkiness to it. I'll admit that. I got better at this nonfiction thing after that book.
The perks of self-publishing, I guess.
Yeah.
So I just quickly for the listener, not the reader, who might not know who you are, I just wanted to give a kind of quick informal introduction. We're talking to Walter Bosley, a researcher of all sorts of different stuff. I kind of had a little list like speculative history in the best sense, geomancy, 19th century airship mystery, Fortiana, the Breakaway Civilization, and many other topics. You also have the bona fides as a former special agent of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, if I got that right.
Yep.
and have worked for the FBI and as a counterintelligence, I believe.
Yes, yes.
So that's all very cool. And I kind of wanted to say also that a lot of people out there in this climate of conspiracy paranoia would read your resume and say, "Oh, I don't believe anything that guy says."
Man, there are a few out there.
I'm sure. But no doubts about that here with us.
Oh, thanks.
So anyway, okay, the reason you're here is that you have a new book, and it's called Shimmering Light, Lost in an MKUltra House of Anu.
Mm-hmm.
And we have all read it, I believe, and it's a very fascinating piece of work.
I will say that my concern is that it's clunky also, because I wrote it pretty quickly.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of, I guess my first little question that I had was, I've been following you on Facebook for a while, and you kind of keep a running tally of your writing habits on there, and I noticed how you've started books and given up on them, and started other projects. What kind of got you onto this one and made you kind of stick with it and follow through?
Okay. Well, actually, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I have no trouble talking about that. This year was the first time I had ever encountered that, where I started a book and then realized, oh, I can't go any further with this for very legitimate reasons, and then started another one, and for essentially the same reason I couldn't go farther with that one, and it had nothing to do with like writer's block. I don't experience writer's block. There's always something to write. What it was is I need to do more research. I realized that I had hit a wall in order to do the book properly, in my opinion. These two particular books I'm talking about, I really need to do more of a certain type of research that, for a variety of reasons, be it funding or other resources, I just couldn't pursue further at that point. So I found myself here in midsummer, I think it was, maybe late summer. Yeah, midsummer, and I thought, man, I gotta do something here. I gotta finish a book this year, because I had gotten on a roll where for a couple of years there I had turned out a few books a year, and that included some fiction. I think in 2014 I did 2 nonfiction books and 3 pulp novels. And then in 2015, I did 2 nonfiction books, which were, required some research. And, I got used to that. And before that, of course, I was turning out some books. So I hit this year, and here I was in like mid to late summer, and I hadn't even come close to finishing a book. And then I realized, there's this thing with my dad. I'd written an article that had been published in Fate magazine, and I'd talked about it elsewhere, but I had never really dived into it and approached it in an in-depth investigation or look or analysis. And I decided, what, that's the book to do. And as it turned out, it feels like that, I really hit a block with those other 2 books, because this was the book I was supposed to get to next. Mm-hmm. I'm a big believer in that kind of thing. I'm intuitive, and once I started on it, it just seemed like, this book's going to happen. I had no doubt.
Yeah.
And here it is.
Here it is.
Yeah, I think you made reference to the story of your father in your secret space conference presentation, and you kind of left it there. And it's interesting that this is now fleshed out in this book. So,
right, and it might still aggravate some folks out there that, if you were to ask me, well, what do you think the actual answer is? I have to tell you, I'm still not sure. I present my intention with this book was to present, okay, here's his service, here's the circumstances, here's the context, in which he fits into this bigger picture, and looky here, this is what I found that was surrounding him and this story he told me. And it just seemed to prove that there's something there enough that it was definitely worth, this book. But as far as a definitive answer, here's what you, the reader, should conclude about this, because here's what I conclude. You know me, if you've read my stuff, I tend to leave things that I can't answer. I'm honest about that, and I leave it up to the reader.
That's what I really enjoy about your work and some other people like Joseph Farrell, etc. Because it seems like the only reasonable way of looking at things.
You mentioned the Facebook. I know I must perplex some people because I'm not one of those guys who I think probably there's some people who will find me on Facebook or Twitter, and they probably assume that I'm going to be posting a never-ending stream of further commentary relative to my research and my books all the time. And you've probably learned I don't do that. People have asked me, and I say, well, I save it for the books. So they get a lot of personal joking humor, and remember, I'm a former Cold Warrior, so you have, and I'm a former federal agent, and I'm an Air Force officer, so you get I come from that rah America background kind of thing. So
sure.
You get my gruff political commentary, which I also have a tendency to quickly delete because the writer in me says, "Oh, nobody wants to hear that. Get rid of that crap." So
that comes with the territory of Facebook.
Yeah, we're human beings, we all have our foibles.
I wanted to say also, just note, since this is the syncbook.com and the focus is sort of ostensibly on synchronicity. That when I started reading the book, I immediately kind of was affected by it because it is a personal story about your father. And actually, my dad just passed away just a few months ago.
I'm sorry to hear that. I know what you're going through.
Yeah, it's been rough, but that seemed like a sync to me. And the whole idea of sort of coming to grips and terms with like your father's legacy and what his life was and how it affected you, I just really resonated with me. And so I thought, before we go any further, we should probably sort of attempt some kind of summary or rundown of the various kind of the journey the book kind of brings about.
Maybe it's pretty dense in terms of where it all goes. And it really gets a lot of your strands from other books that, I don't know, I was almost apprehensive this evening about this conversation because there's so many different aspects that I'd love to really go into depth. And summary probably is not my strong point, so I don't know if Alex or SJ could throw it out there, but
or Walter if he wants to volunteer.
No. See, as he was saying that, I'm sitting here nodding my head. Here's what's interesting. I am terrible at one of the reasons why I will kind of gently and politely insist that hosts read the books first before I come on is because the question I hate is from the host who hasn't read it, who says, "Tell us about your book." Oh, I hate that because I have discovered that I can come up with when I'm pitching a producer on a movie idea, that kind of thing, I can come up with good pitches. But when you ask me to off the cuff summarize one of my own books, which I have written, unless I've rehearsed it and I got it typed out in front of me, I'm terrible at that.
Yeah, I guess I committed a bit of an interview faux pas there.
How so? No. You couldn't know that until I told you. In fact, I think that's the first time I've ever said that publicly. I usually just kind of bite the bullet and go, "Oh, okay."
Well, I agree with you totally. So, but let me try. I'll give it a shot. This is a book about a story about the life of your dad and how it relates to the kind of milieu of 20th century U.S. Air Force secret space program. I don't know what the word would be.
See how difficult it is?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. but it does tie into everything. It ties into ancient fairy lore. It turned into Roswell, to Operation Paperclip, in which the U.S. Employed a bunch of ex-Nazis or current Nazis after the war, into the so-called Breakaway Civilization, and MKUltra, the CIA's experiments with mind control, and the many and various sub-projects that came before that. So, again,
I could help out.
Yeah, go for it, SJ. You've been
Well, I saw it as a. I mean, every family has a story that people tell, or get told when you're kids, and I saw it really as your journey, Walter, of kind of trying to come to terms with this story that your father had told you, and it seems like that was the central. Everything jumps off from that, but there's a basic story you were told by your father a couple times in your life, and then the book was your research around sort of the bare bones of that story to try to fill in the gaps and determine if it's true or not true or what was true. And so I see that as the basic structure of the book, and in the course of your research, of course, it goes into almost a lot of different, very interesting things that I think we all want to jump in and start going into the particulars. But maybe we could just start with a basic summary of what your dad told you, kind of the story that he told you, or in simple terms,
Sure.
And I can make it. Why don't we kick it to you? I mean, I could try, but I think you're right.
I could do, a quick off the. See, that's easier for me to tell you as a quick summary of my dad's tale than it is my book.
Very
I
well
will
done,
say
SJ.
that since what you were saying, about all the things that pop up in this book, I wanted to add on there. When you mentioned, Roswell's in there and Paperclip's in there and MKUltra's in there. Here's the thing about this, and you've read the book. I'm guessing you'll agree. These things are in there legitimately so. Yeah. I did not sit down and say, you know what, I'm going to write a book that includes all these popular things just to sell a book, and I'll throw Paperclip and MKUltra and I'll throw Roswell in there. Oh, no. These things clearly, as you can see, what I found were there. I mean, the Paperclip Nazis pretty much created, aerospace medicine for the U.S. Air Force, after World War II, and actually, when you look at their influences during the war, and again, they really created this budding space program, and what I think was a classified Air Force space program that my dad, because of his specialty, was clearly a part of. And was in the middle of with what he did. So, that's the thing, is all these things that are in there, they're legitimately in there. And it all starts with this story about how when my dad was in some advanced training at Gunter Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama, the summer he met my mom, he was tasked with a special project which he did not identify, the reason that he and a couple of other guys got on a plane in Alabama and headed for Texas. And in the middle of that flight, the plane somewhere over Louisiana or Mississippi banks northward, and out comes an intel officer who informs them that they're not going to Texas, that they're going to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where, according to my dad, they received a briefing on what happened with the legendary, we now know the legendary Roswell incident of 1947 in New Mexico. And they were shown, according to my dad, the bodies and the craft and, the various debris and stuff. And they were told that it had happened again. Now, this, of course, was, as I said, 1958. And they were told that it had happened in Arizona, and that they were going to be sent out to Arizona to be part of a project that was involved in search and rescue on the pilot of this vehicle from another civilization. So off they went to Arizona. They met the mysterious man named Wilson, who, yes, I've written about the Wilsons. And this, hearing the story all my life, and then what I learned subsequently as I talk in the book, is one of the reasons why the Wilsons have fascinated me. And there my dad was in this subterranean operation, U.S. Air Force operation, highly, deeply classified, however you want to put it. And he and a couple of other guys encountered some other people whose civilization, culture, whatever, had gone underground ages ago after a, planetary cataclysm, my dad said. And that encounter kind of ended tragically because the two little groups kind of startled each other. And essentially, an Air Force guy ended up being killed by some type of weapon being carried by the people they encountered. And usually that's where my dad's story would end when, as he told it. And I learned through another source that subsequent to that, for some reason, something had gone wrong and my dad was removed from the project. And I assumed to, return to Alabama, where, he brought my mom out to California because he was stationed at George Air Force Base at the time in Victorville. And they got married, and, the rest is my family history. But that is the basics of the story. And as I mentioned, I had learned through a source, a mentor who had spent decades in the intelligence community, who had told me a little bit more. And when I decided to write this book and started fleshing it out, there was Operation Paperclip and MKUltra and, Nazi space science and stuff like that all over it. Not to mention, yes, the ancient lore, which I had already kind of found in my initial looks at the whole thing. So it's just a potpourri of weirdness. Yeah.
It's okay. As I read the story of that your dad, the story of what your dad told, it struck me as a story that if someone weren't familiar with the kind of work that you do and the research that you do, they would read that and go, "Oh, well, that's just silly. That's loony business." It kind of reminded me of something you would see on the original Star Trek series with the tube gun and someone just falling, because the special effects were so limited,
like a switch turned off.
Sure, exactly. And at a second I thought, well, maybe they had actually shown that to you. Then I realized it was before that even happened, so that was not possible. But but you kind of start with that story of that somewhat fantastic sounding story, and you just kind of deconstruct it, and in a very logical and rigorous way. So maybe where did you? What was your first step, perhaps, in getting to what you saw as the bottom of this? Where did you go first?
Okay. Well, remember what I had heard initially for years was my dad's version. And then, as the book explains, I was getting input from my source, the guy who I call Colonel Lundy in the book. That's a pseudonym. And from him, what I was getting was that this happened as my dad told it. Okay, so that includes the seemingly fantastic elements. Well, being a professional investigator, I have to look at things, objectively, and I have to consider all the possibilities that I can find that might give a more so-called rational explanation. So I just decided when it came time to write the book that I would look at the situation that way. I would set aside, and I'm somebody who has between my sisters and I'm more of I can turn on the cold fish switch. I've been a professional investigator. I've had to do that. So I'm the guy who says, if my mom committed a crime, I'd throw her butt in jail, that kind of thing. And and I'm serious too. That's what's weird. So I just decided, okay, I'm going to look at the Air Force and my dad's specialty in 1958, and I'm going to see, okay, what do I have? Well, I had the lead where my dad told me that in his training over the years that he had to see the old Nazi films, the old aviation medicine Nazi films on their tests with altitude. And he described exactly what I found in the source material. Sure enough, for instance, Annie Jacobson's book on Operation Paperclip, she refers to and cites the Nazi films that were just exactly what my dad had described for years. And that was they'd just throw somebody in an altitude chamber without a pressure suit, and they'd watch what the human body does. And it's really gruesome. And that's what these guys would do. This is what the Nazis would do. Well, think about it. You capture these guys, and the decision was made, look, we're not going to do the heinous stuff they did, but they filmed it. They documented it on film. And the decision was made, we're going to have our people that need to work with this stuff watch these films, because they need to see, they need to understand. And it's exactly what my dad had described for years. And that right there was one of the first nuggets that I had to then say, okay, I need to look at the Nazi Science Association with this. And lo and behold, what I found was all the material in the book, just tons of it, that U.S. Air Force, aerospace medicine, aviation medicine, it's called both, it came out of what the Nazis have been doing, and we got it through Operation Paperclip. And what's more, I discovered that was kind of because I was in the Air Force, okay. Really, when you look at Operation Paperclip and the Air Force's involvement in it at that time, the U.S. Army Air Force, you see that what seemed to be driving Paperclip was the Air Force interest, and particularly with this aviation medicine stuff. I mean, they wanted the V2s, they wanted to develop, that rocketry, which then went into ICBMs and stuff. But what you don't hear about so much, what's not so popular to talk about in the history stuff that we've heard all our lives, is how much aviation medicine was driving that. And as I say in the book, and I'm sure we'll get to later, you need to think about that when you reconsider, gee, what was the Air Force thinking about doing? Why was aviation medicine so popular? Well, that's manned space travel is why. But so there I had the nugget about the Nazi films my dad said he saw, and then there I started looking at Operation Paperclip, and then I just realized, okay, I can begin to really, as you say, deconstruct this story, because what came with the aviation medicine, okay, was the psychological research, which grew into MKUltra. And I had to consider, because here was the other nugget, Colonel Lundy, the guy who I call Colonel Lundy, he had told me that they had used hypnosis on my dad to suppress what had happened. Well, when I had the Nazi film nugget, which led to, for me, the Operation Paperclip aviation medicine revelation, it was a revelation for me. And I had this, they used hypnosis on him to suppress it. Well, right there was the MKUltra connection. And I hope I convey that in the book. It's certainly in the research materials.
And Walter, that also really mirrored what other people like Buzz Aldrin had basically said about how he gets really sick when he tries to speak about. And he's, it's interesting to bring up his name right now, being that he was just in his, but it really made me think of your dad's, it seems like he was holding. I almost came away thinking that it really was like two events that were been overlaid in his head, and
exactly, and that's where I was getting at with the, I had to just accept the possibility that this wild story he told me was just a planted narrative, as they called it.
But it's weird. I almost still feel like both could be true somehow. And even your account of the story of somebody else being shot, and perhaps relating to why Wilson may have kicked him off of this. I know we're getting to a lot of details here, but it seems like even that could be a sort of fragmented memory of something. So this sort of fragmentation of memories and simulated, repatterned memories. Yeah, it's really fascinating.
And even as I was deconstructing it, and even as I said, hey, this could have been a completely fabricated layer, this planted narrative of this wild, weird story, and on and so forth. Then I came back to, well, wait a minute, Colonel Lundy, he told me that this was real, that what my dad, so Lundy had no reason to plant that narrative in my head. You follow me?
So your other source, Billy Less, was that correct? Verifies the name of the person who comes out of the cabin.
Exactly.
That's miraculous. That was another one of those moments where it really sort of dispelled the idea that it was all a fabrication of his in his mind.
However, we have to be objective as investigators. Sure. Remember what I say about that. That happened on the plane that was going to Wright Pat in the beginning. And remember, the planted narrative would have been placed after what happened at Wright Pat, after what happened at in Arizona, if it indeed was at Arizona. Sure. So that part could have been real. But the next question we pop up is, who the hell was Billy Less, and how and why would he know about a guy who was on a plane in 1958?
Yeah.
I was going to sort of...
then again, that negates the planted narrative thing, right? I think. Maybe
sure. I was going to bring up that whole aspect of Colonel Lundy and Billy Less, and obviously these are pseudonyms. These are people you can't name directly. What can you tell us about them? Because it seems that's such a crucial... it's almost like a deep throat Mr. X kind of
exactly
situation.
I know. And some people are going to say, "Oh, he's making this up." Colonel Lundy. The name, the last name is drawn from another man who I knew, and that's another story I won't go into here, but it's something that could very well corroborate my dad's story as told. But I used his last name and to cover for a man who was my mentor, who was started out in the military, and he was in the intelligence community, we'll put it that way, for almost 50 years. And he was the guy who he brought me into my career. He kind of helped make my career happen. He's the one that said, hey kid, would you rather work on movies or would you rather learn the secrets of the universe kind of thing?
That's fascinating. Distinction there. When you say work on movies, was that something you were going to do before?
Oh God, I grew up loving movies. In junior high, I told myself I wanted to be a film director. I was into making films throughout high school, wrote screenplays while in college, was a production assistant briefly after graduating college. I'd started out college as a film major. Yeah, I love cinema. I love film. And it's interesting, my son has picked up that torch.
I've heard of that.
And that's what he's doing. He's directing horror films. He just finished his second feature. He's doing an internship with some guys over at a company called Airship, and they're kind of known in the indie film world. And so he's it's great. He's taken that torch up.
That's awesome.
And so Colonel Lundy, he passed away earlier this year, but I still don't feel right naming him. Mm-hmm. At this point. And then the other gentleman, Billy Less, is a guy who in the past has had association with the intelligence community himself. And to be honest, he's kind of a murky character. I'm not quite sure if he's not affiliated now. So this conversation we had that I was telling you about was back in I think 2007.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, SJ, do you have any
Well,
thoughts?
yeah, I got a lot of thoughts here. I'm trying to figure out what would be the most beneficial thing to breach here. I think the idea of cover narratives through mind control programming. I mean, I know it's a popular idea that maybe one of the explanations of the UFO phenomenon is that was kind of a cover narrative that was propagated in the culture out wide. And so maybe it's the case that there was, as a part of that propagation, you would have individuals kind of being brainwashed to believe, you know what I'm saying, that they believed it was actually real.
Yeah.
And so that what's the best lie, but the person believes that lie to be true, that kind of phenomenon.
Right.
I mean, how wide, and it seems like it would be other people than just your father. Have you seen anything like this in other parts of the literature of like soldiers sort of being brainwashed, for lack of a better term? And I'm not saying that's what happened to him, but let's assume for a second.
But it could have been. It could have been. You know, it could be like, as they call it, a planted narrative. As such, nothing pops to mind. But I think, for instance, UFO literature is, in recent years, particularly the last couple of decades, there are stories similar to, my dad's that have surfaced. There's the guy who, a couple of guys who talk about, being in a open gun battle in these underground bases.
I'm thinking of Phil Schneider in particular.
Yeah, the Phil Schneider stuff.
Mark Richards.
And so what's interesting is this theme, has emerged. Now, some people could say, well, that's where Bosley got it, and that's why he wrote his book. He just wants to. Well, as I said, my dad started telling me this stuff in the 1970s.
Yeah.
And the reason I didn't talk about it all these years until I wrote the article, and if you recall, I wrote the article in Fate under my pseudonym at the time because I had sensitive employment. I used a fiction pseudonym that I write under sometimes, E.A. Guest. I didn't talk about it because I was working for the FBI. I was an agent for the Air Force. I was doing counterterrorism work, and Colonel Lundy. I remember when I was working for the FBI, I had written a novel based on a screenplay I'd written in '86. I mentioned in this book, Shimmering Light, that in 1986, I sat down with all my UFO literature and kind of, I think it's in Shimmering Light, it might be in another one, and I kind of rethought the whole UFO thing. And the result of that was this screenplay I had written. And then I novelized it in 1990, 91 when I was in Manhattan for the FBI. And I gave a copy of it to Colonel Lundy to read, and his response was, this is good. This is very good. And then he said, do not try to publish this. And I'm like, well, I worked on the thing to try to publish it. He told me, he says, no, because as you know, you have to send it to headquarters for approval. I'm like, yeah, but there's nothing in there that, he says, here's the thing. There is plenty in there. There's some things in there that you don't realize are true. And his words to me were, you don't want them to know how much you actually know about certain things. So he told me, sit on that book, get that published, not while you work for Uncle Sam. And I just lost my point.
It's funny because I think a lot of writers
where were we
have
going?
that same scenario happen where they have been approached after they've written things. I mean, Philip K. Dick comes to mind, and
I remember where I was going with that. I was trying to make the point that I did have this story, and at one time I did attempt to write about this stuff, but I was told not to because of the employment. So, to go back to the point that I with this book, I know when people look at the cover and they see the title and the subtitle, they're going to think I've jumped on the bandwagon, when actually I think when you look at it, you'll see that I haven't. And it'll probably be the only and last time I write about this.
Just bringing this, just grabbing, I'm just going to grab a thread here and pull, is that is the whole issue of underground bases. And I thought it was kind of funny when you start writing about that, and you made a comment somewhere, something to the effect of, there are many fantastic claims about underground bases and all of that stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
it's all very sketchy. And then you proceed to spend several pages kind of citing people who say that actually there's extremely well documented information regarding this idea that there are underground bases.
Yeah, you noticed that, huh?
Yeah. So when people joke about that, I just kind of have to roll my eyes. But there is.
I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish. You probably questioned it.
I didn't really. No, just you take up from there.
What I was trying to do there was say that yes, there are some things that, as you say, are sketchy and beyond the pale, even for me, and yet look at what we've got here. A whole lot of underground facility construction was going on, and it apparently wasn't all missile silos.
Sure.
So that's part of the objectivity thing. I try to say, look, this could all be a misunderstanding. This could all be BS. This could all be just a layer or whatever. But hey, let's look at this evidence here for it. And that goes back to that. You decide.
I just was driving across South Dakota last week, and, the Minuteman silos are there. But also what's not known is some of the huge caves that are in that region. There's Wind Cave that I went to as a kid, and it's huge. It's humongous. And so, yeah, I think that what you're talking about in terms of Arizona and Holbrook, was that the...
Holbrook, yeah. Holbrook is the best candidate I could find for where my dad might have this might have been happening. Whatever happened, Holbrook was the best place I could locate.
The thing about that is that Aleister Crowley comes up later in the book, and he was a mountaineer, and here we're looking at two positions, so high altitude and low and below surface, and also ocean related stuff, I would say, because there's a lot of stories about ocean portals. So it's like what happens to reality or to ability to move in a perhaps non-physical way at these extremes of our, or what changes in us physically as we go to these places too, was what I thought of.
Yeah. And that ties in with what my dad did, actually, as you know, because you've read the book. He was a physiological training specialist and, ran the altitude chamber. And that had everything to do with what are the effects of altitude and rapid altitude changes on human physiology. Exactly. Amazing. There's that theme there.
Amazing.
And it's almost, there's a sort of, with the Nazis, it's their experiments were just so, it's just like an extreme objectivity or detachment with where they just, throw a person in a thing and throwing them up and see what happens. Whereas with someone like Crowley or the Tuatha De Danann or that kind of thing, where it would be a more almost spiritual or perception subjective realm. So there's almost like there's these competing realms almost of consciousness, of subjective and objective, where we have the military or the Air Force or whoever digging deep and going as far as they can, but with these extremely technologically kind of detached methods, overlapping with the sort of stories of fairy lore and so-called aliens or whatever, which that's what that made me think of. I don't know.
Yeah. So I had a question here, Walter, about the Nazi connection to the U.S. military. I'm here in Austin, Texas, and I know that one of the big guys, I forgot his name, Strughold or something.
Strughold, Hubertus Strughold.
Yes, there he is. Yeah, he came in San Antonio and was here in Texas at the Air Force Base down here. But his big thing, he wrote a manual, I think, on the body and some of the strains on the body.
Right.
at high altitude, or just what you described. And I guess that manual was purged at some point, and then they republished it once he was here. And later in his career, it all came out that he was basically doing experiments on prisoners and just the worst of the worst,
Yeah,
that the idea, I mean, it seems like there was this connection between the Nazis and between our military, and we wanted them even before the war was over, and we created these rat lines to get them, here or in other places. Right. I'm curious how, I mean, you've got to imagine that we were in cahoots at some level with the Nazis before, during the war, such that it wasn't as simple as German nationals versus American nationals, that there were other lines that were actually fighting in the war, like people, I don't know. Do you see what I'm saying here? I mean, where it's like, we had, go ahead.
I wouldn't say any kind of formal cooperation. I would say that if there was anything going on during the war, and I say this because I've done this for the Air Force, I would say, and I know the World War II history of this particular tactic, I would say there was probably indeed some double agentry going on. Well, I mean, we know that there was double agentry going on, to the maximum during World War II. When you go into that line of work, you study some of the glorious double agentry that was going on in that conflict, and look up a guy named Garbo, like the movie actress, and I'll tell you, some of the guys who trained me, just the mention of Garbo brings tears to their eyes, because he was such a brilliant handler and master of double agentry, and it's a very interesting story. So I would say that to take further what you're saying, that there probably was indeed some double agentry going on relative to these specific things I talk about. I would say that Harry Armstrong and Otis Benson probably were what we call in the business customers of some of the double agentry that I say was probably going on, specifically in the field of aerospace and aviation medicine, because, as I say in the book, what I think Benson in particular was really pushing the Air Force to do, and that was manned space travel. Now, I became convinced before I ever heard of Otis Benson's name and researched all this stuff that the Air Force has a classified manned space program. But this just further kind of, I gave myself a high five, because I'm like, aha, see, it's even in the open book history on this. So, yeah, a guy like Benson and a guy like Harry Armstrong, and when you read my book, when you read the source material on them, when you read any biomaterial on them, these guys, I could see them going to the intel collectors, the OSS in particular, saying, we want to get close to this program. We want to get close to that guy. And that might be very well how they initially actually identified some of these 58 that they brought over through Paperclip. See, I mean, we're told in the open book history that, Strughold and a couple of others said, oh, you want this guy, and that guy. It might very well be that whatever was going on during the war, as far as contact through what I say would have been double agents, that might be how some of those guys were identified, and specifically because they knew what they were doing that has remained classified to this day.
And I guess go ahead, Alex.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, at some point I'd like to go back into these alliances that were in the 19th century and maybe before that. I mean, I'm not sure how long you've traced this back, but the groups like NIMSA and other groups that were in America, in Germany, and that, I guess that's what my question was more getting at, is that there's clearly these allegiances that are non-national, that are supranational.
Yeah, and the stuff I've covered in my origin book and in Empire of the Wheel 2 also, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had read, just for some background, we all also read, shortly after you published it, Alex emailed me and Dennis your article about the Trump family ties, possibly to, I guess, Sonora Aero Club.
Yes, the Sonora Aero Club.
That to me is just there's this broader issue, this topic of what are these supranational groups, and they're clearly very powerful and well connected.
Right.
And there's kind of a nexus with these groups, with wars that are fought in the names of nations. But these other groups certainly have an interest and probably are aligned and influencing. And I mean, it just gets really, I guess, who's really controlling us, Walter? What's really happening? How do we really map this stuff out?
I think it's a case of who's really pulling the strings, but yet we'd be surprised at how much to what degree we actually do control ourselves, that kind of thing. Look, speculatively, and I underline that word, and you guys, my theory is that there were two major breakaway civilizations that emerged in the 19th century going into the 20th century. And, anybody who's looked at my stuff knows what, about these groups, one being the Nimza, which, by the way, that thing did not originate with me. We get that from Charles Delshall, the source of the Sonora Aero Club material. But the other one that I call the 1903, because I theorize that what you had was the Prussian Nimza, okay? They were pushing for, according to Delshall, they were pushing for the Sonora Aero Club to develop these flying machines for military purposes. And the men running the club did not want to do that. They refused to do that. And there was a little bit of tension there. And then, of course, the leader of the club, and I'm doing air quotes here, dies in an accident. And, we're, according to Delshall, we're led to believe that, by the late 1850s, approaching 1860, the club disbands and, man loses this technology forever, blah, blah, blah. However, as I present and has been presented in an excellent book by a guy named Michael Busby, Solving the 1896 Airship Mystery. There was a gentleman named Solomon Andrews who during the Civil War demonstrated what appeared to be an anti-gravity craft to Abraham Lincoln's a couple of his cabinet ministers as representatives of the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, and members of the press in Washington, D.C. And we're told that in spite of this successful demonstration, Andrews was told, we're fighting a war and we don't see any practical use for this, and thank you, but no thanks. Well, I, of course, argue that what they really did was they scooped it right up, and this is my theory, that this became the first black project in American history. Post-Civil War, and they did indeed develop this, and this is what resulted in the 1890s airship mystery. Okay, this was the American group that was still at that time connected to the U.S. government in a black project, and this brings in the Wilsons that I talk about and such. And then we get into the 20th century, and we have what I call the 1903. And I call them that because the American group decides, look what we can do. This is my opinion, my theory. Look what we can do, and this is their breakaway point. Because as the legend goes, they attempted some spectacular feat, which is supposedly a journey to Mars. Yes, in 1903, and Tesla's connected with the legend and everything. Sean Castile is an author, and Tim Schwartz have written about this. And I argue that this group that I call the 1903, they truly are breakaway in that they wanted to go do their own thing, whereas the Nimza, in my opinion, continued to want to be neck deep in the affairs of our world, and I argue were the major influence behind, in the shadows behind the Nazis, the rise of the Nazis. And so what you've got are two groups that rival each other, can check each other because they possess the same or similar technologies, one of which wants to have its hand in controlling this world, the other of which doesn't want to control this world, but for the benefit, people, they kind of serve as a check and balance against whatever the Nimza has become, which I think is the nefarious breakaway civilization we hear talked about. Yeah, basically in a nutshell, I reduce it to good guys, bad guys. I see the 1903 as the good guys, more of neutral good guys, and the Nimza, whatever they are now, as the bad guys in this.
I wanted to bring up this in relation to Joseph Farrell's Cosmic War scenario, where he goes back, to the ancient times and kind of presents a similar story where, there is a war in the heavens that relates to the exploded planet hypothesis, in the sense that the idea that the asteroid belt in our solar system was once a planet that was destroyed, possibly using the Giza the Giza pyramid as a weapon. Do you find a direct correlation between that kind of conflict and the one today that you describe, or is it just sort of yeah, that's the question. Do you find
it's connected. It's connected, and I talk about that in a couple of the books. I show the in analyzing Nimza, because what you have this Prussian Nimza that we learn about from Delschow, and they were active in the 1850s in California building these flying machines, and they were actually sponsoring other groups that Delschow alludes to but doesn't go into details on. He was sent by them to check up on the Sonora Aero Club in California. Now, the way he spelled Nimza, and I won't go into it here, it's in my books. What it does is it points to clues back in the murky past, the way, what we call antediluvian pre-flood, so to speak, past, that would be the era that you're talking about, that Joseph is referring to, when there was this massive war going on with these now lost civilizations. And what happened, and this of course is the theory, is that humankind, Earth-based humankind, was introduced to the technologies, or shall I say the pieces and the remnants of the technologies of these lost civilizations. And over the centuries of known history, they have attempted to find and recapture and rebuild, kind of reverse engineer this lost ancient technology. And this, in my view, led to this secretive Nimza group, which was behind the Prussian Nimza, and then which in turn was behind the rise of the Nazis.
I thought you did a really good job of tracing that back even further in the higher side chat, where you both the Egyptian strand, but also the I'm blanking on it, just like you did in that talk. The Templars, the strand of Templars. That's the German branch.
The Teutonic Knights.
Yeah.
The Teutonic Knights, Teutonic, however you want to. Whatever in the mood you're in on pronunciation.
The Library of Alexandria, yeah.
And that would be are the Templars and the Teutonic Knights separate entities? I'm not.
They are separate, but the Teutonic Knights, kind of use the Templars as their model.
I see.
Totally use the Templars as their model, but they were not the Templars.
Because the Templars were, in the lore, as I can recall, were sort of tasked with guarding the which one of the artifacts, I don't know, but it was was it the Ark of the Covenant?
Destiny or something,
or the Spear of I can't remember. But anyway, these ancient sort of biblical artifacts that are.
Well, the story is that when they went to Jerusalem, they went there already with the foreknowledge that there was something major to be found there, a major secret. And they spent most of their time digging underneath the old temple to find that, and kind of in a cursory way, it's like, yeah, go help the pilgrims and go do the nightly things. Our real reason for being here is to dig into this secret, which today is unknown technically, or in official accepted history. We don't know what it is they found, but the legend is that they indeed found something, that when they went back to France, from whence they came, it was a game changer for their order. And because of what they found, and then when you combine, what was captured at Constantinople, it just basically the throne and Rome, the Vatican, backed off from them. And that's part of the reason why later they were persecuted, because they had become too rich and too powerful. I mean, their fleet was as, if not more powerful than the fleets of the various nations of Europe. Their naval fleet, which at the time of the persecution, remember, when all these Templars disappeared, because they didn't get them all, most of their fleet disappeared too. See, and that led to pirate history as we know it, because initially the pirates flying the Jolly Roger, that's an old Templar symbol. They made war on the Catholic nations because it was a thing where the Vatican had turned against them and had persecuted Jacques de Molay and some of their fellow knights. So they made war on just the fleets of the Catholic nations. That's why when you watch the old pirate movies and stuff, they're always sinking the ships of Spain and France, So, but yeah, they were looking for something that led to, this great power and wealth, and then led to them having to flee after the persecution, and then really go underground and, according to the legend, hide what they had, what they knew as far as relics. The wealth wasn't, the money was just part of it. It was allegedly the relics.
And you say go underground, which I obviously
returns
us back to
figuratively,
yes. But I was just going to say that kind of ties into this idea that there's more underground than we know, and perhaps
if anybody found out about it, it was the Templars.
Yes.
So, among the groups.
If the Ark of the Covenant is anywhere, it might be 100 miles underground, as far as we know.
Yeah.
And Mark Leclerc used to talk about the spinning wheels of Ezekiel, and that seems like a Delchau drawing or a Schauberg drawing. Like, it seems like could be speaking of similar. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Take a look at it's a fantastic book, published and edited by Stephen Romano.
I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, isn't that a great book?
It's incredible. It's incredible.
It's a book on Charles Delchau, and it's titled Charles A.A. Delchau, and it's the full color large plates of just hundreds of these Delchau drawings of these arrows, and I recommend that book highly to anyone seriously interested in the Delchau Sonora Aero Club material.
Yeah, it's incredible. And the Pete Navarro book is good too, but the scale of the other book is so large you get to see it up close, which is
and we wouldn't have known about Delchau or had these books if it wasn't for Pete Navarro, because Pete Navarro was the one in 1971 who found these things in the junk shop. I mean, the Dementals had them, but it wouldn't have come to public light.
Yeah, incredible. That story is incredible. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you, Walter, about, so, it makes sense that if NIMSA, just to go back a little bit further back to the more closer to the present, if NIMSA was running these operations and what are they called, flying machines, that they're in the 19th century, there's a controversy there. It seems like they would have people on this question of how does it affect the human biology. And so that there might be antecedent research or doctors that were antecedents to the doctors you refer to in the most recent book. In your father's profession. And so is the Air Force aligned one way or the other with like NIMSA or like the Air Force?
I would not say that the United States Air Force is aligned with NIMSA. I think.
What about the Navy?
I think no. I don't think the U.S. military. Now. I'm saying this, telling you that yes, we did get these Nazi scientists, but organizationally, never allied with NIMSA, the organization per se, or the Nazi Party per se. We captured the fruits of their labor.
Yeah.
Okay. And we ran with it, and we developed it with the help of the guys who did it for them. So in that sense, we are the beneficiaries. Yeah, I would say that, the U.S. military obviously was the beneficiaries of, this stuff, which I identify with NIMSA influence. So in that way, I would say, yeah, beneficiaries, allies, associates.
So you might almost say that there's NIMSA, the bad guys, the 1903, the good guys, and then the U.S. Who have been catching
don't
up.
forget the Russians, because the Russians got a bunch of smart Nazis too.
Right. Yeah, can't forget the Russians.
Well, I was just going to say something like the JFK coup that people talk about, that a certain groups kind of took over. Like when you study the JFK assassination, it's clear that there is groups in the military that are so-called good, like wanted to pull out of Vietnam, that he had hired to write that big report before they killed him. But then there's clearly an element of the military that was, I would say, bad. I mean, whether or not they're NIMSA or, so is it possible that even within the,
if you
like
wanted
even within the United States?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Just to finish the question, if even within the United States military, it seems like there could be factions that are aligned with these other groups. And so anyhow, just to throw that out, I mean, go ahead.
The place to look for those guys would be in the conduits between the U.S. military and that industrial complex that Eisenhower warned about. Okay, the place to look for that would be, look at the officers who would be the liaisons, the go-betweens, the conduits, the so-called within the military lobbyists, so to speak, for the industrial complex. Okay, because that's where the corruption of your military guys would be found. I don't have illusions. I mean, I was a special agent of the Air Force OSI. Okay, the reason an organization like that exists is because there was bad people in the Air Force, and you have to, we let's be honest. It's not just evil civilians that organizations. The CID, Army CID, they investigate bad Army people, and NCIS, they investigate bad Navy people. So, absolutely. There's something.
This kind of ties into the modern, current, very current day-to-day scenario that I kind of wanted to talk about, with regarding Trump and all his appointments. Now he's just announced this guy James Mattis as Secretary of Defense, and it seems to me that that there is something different about the people he's keeping close to him and appointing. So it seems like he's more interested in a relationship with our U.S. military and those people, rather than, say, a Bush administration who was all, connected with the you could almost call it a mafia that has kind of been in charge. And I wonder if that's how you feel with what you're seeing.
Could you restate that last part of that? Right before you said the Bush administration, I missed that part.
Oh yeah, his appointments seems that he is more aligned with the sort of working class, boots on the ground. Not to turn this into some sort of stump speech, but the military. The more close to the earth the military than someone like Bush or Cheney, who were appointing these industrial connected neoconservatives. And I'm just wondering if that's how you see the current situation.
Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, I see, and again, like you said, not to go off on a flight of fancy here. We are just now properly. Whether some people like it or not, we are just now properly beginning the 21st century. We spent 16 years in a dark place, And between the Bush and Obama administrations, the years that we have spent in these wars, that's definitely the hand of the military-industrial complex. And look at it this way. Okay, look at the connections in the past that the Bush family had through Prescott Bush with Nazi Germany, right? And their whole neocon thing, and where they took us politically, 41 and 43. Okay. Now look at what has happened to the Democrat Party since Jimmy Carter. It has become this, quite frankly, radical, almost socialist kind of stronghold. And where were the Democrats? Like, okay, my dad was a Democrat until 1980, and he was one of those. He was a Reagan Democrat. He voted Democrat, and it was both Teddy Kennedy and Jimmy Carter that completely nauseated him with the Democrats, and he voted Republican after that, just because the Democrats. Now, here's the thing. What did I say there? A radical socialist thing. Now, here you have what I said before about where, the Bush administrations and their historical connections to the Nazis. And here you have where the Democrat Party has gone, and they're into PC and wanting to tell you what to think and, what to not say and blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's control, right? They have become the party of social control. They become the Orwellian 1984 party. You've got the Bush family and their Nazi connections. You've got where the Democrat Party's gone with their socialism and radicalism. That's NIMSA, my friends. It's the same NIMSA coin. Yeah. Okay, and Trump, for all his roughness, and for all the and here's the thing: one way you can tell that this new direction has NIMSA and the military-industrial complex worried is look at the reactions you're seeing from the people who are serving as the face of them. You're seeing implosion and stuff because, in their little halls of power, they are freaking out because one reason is they're not sure who's behind Trump. And what I was implying, or maybe I said it, I can't remember. I'll have to go back and look at my blog. But I have said this in private conversations with other researchers I'm close to, because we asked this question, and I'm going to throw it out now because this is a show about speculations and stuff. If I had to guess, I would say that somebody was definitely behind Trump to keep the Clinton machine at bay, okay? Because those people are criminals, all right? And they will go to any lengths to stop and neutralize a political opponent. And you look at how he went at them without fear. Well, somebody has to be behind him. And I would say, my guess is that it's connected somehow with the 1903. If I had to guess, if we're talking within the context of these breakaways that I've written about, okay, if we're going to talk about the context of the NIMSAs and the Nazis and the neocons and the military-industrial complex, and I got those all tied together, then if my honest position right now is that I suspect a 1903 backing, of this rough guy who pisses off a bunch of people.
Reality TV star.
I think it was one of these things where, the NIMSA thought they were going to, through their New World Order and all this crap, they thought, oh, that's it. We got control of the world now. And in swoops their old rivals saying, not so fast.
That brings me to, it doesn't bring me to one thing. It brings me to about six things. But the whole Trump family, which you did sort of go into in your post, which I've sort of been looking at a lot recently, is very interesting, especially his uncle John Trump, who had a curious relation to Nikola Tesla. Now, is this confirmed? Is this speculation? I'm not sure of the
the article that I cited. What's the magazine that it's in? Yeah, this is and the sources of it are cited in the Wikipedia. But there's another article that's not Wikipedia that a recent article, and this is to the extent that I could confirm, how we confirm things before we put things in our books. Yeah, this wild, wacky, truthful fact of history, documented history, was that, Dr. Trump, Professor Trump, was asked by the FBI to review the Tesla documents, the so-called legendary secret Tesla documents. And so you got to ask yourself, wow, and that's kind of where I go with that blog post.
And he was brought in to look at this, and he determined what exactly? That there was nothing there, or that there was?
I think it was a classic case of, oh yeah, nothing to see here, folks, move along.
And then he secretly bundles up all the papers and runs out of the room by himself.
Yeah, well, I would say that. Well, he was asked to do this by the FBI, and I would say that he privately said, "Oh my God, this is what you can do with this," and wow, this is what he was working on, and here you go. And the FBI, of course, would have taken this to the appropriate S&T, group at the time, which I believe would have been the ONR, the Office of Naval Research, because they were among the people interested in what was in Tesla's safe, and we were in the middle of the war. It was 1943, so yeah, you betcha.
And this would be, so they take it to the FBI, the ONR. Would this be something that the NIMSA Nazi sort of OSS applies, but CIA later, what would later become the CIA? Is that something they would not have seen? Do you see a conflict between the FBI, ONI, and CIA later, which became basically the Nazi kind of thing? With
what do you? I'm not following you.
When Tesla takes when Trump takes Tesla's papers and reports to the FBI, who then give that to?
No. I think it was a case of the FBI. Whoever the agents who got in, and it was the Office of Alien Property, I think, was who the FBI said was the primary agents who seized the documents. These documents were then brought to the FBI. Got their time with these documents, and they brought Professor Trump, into wherever these documents were. Trump himself was not the one involved with going to Tesla's safe in the room where he died.
Gotcha.
Trump was brought in, was asked by the FBI, hey, we need you to look at and analyze these documents. And then the public story is that Trump said, oh yeah, this is all nice, but it's flights, it's flighty stuff. And, that Tesla, he liked to, really have some wild, wacky, imaginings. And, we're told that was the end of it. What I'm saying is that he would have, in his assessment, said, here's what's valuable, and then the FBI would have said, thank you very much, Professor Trump, and then they would have, accordingly gone to the War Department, the ONI, whoever was developing.
Here's a speculative scenario. If John G. Trump and the Trump family, and please just smash me to bits if doesn't align with the facts. If John G. Trump looks at this stuff and then kind of plays a game where he says nothing to see here to the public and to the FBI, and then sort of brings that back to whatever sort of secretive 1903 or whatever group that he may or may not be aligned with. Do you see that as a possibility, or?
Oh, I think that's what I.
Maybe that's what you said.
in the blog is that here we have a by name a Trump in the Sonora Aero Club.
Yeah.
And wow, in 1943, here we have the guy who is connected with the legend of the 1903 journey to Mars, and he dies. And in his safe, there's these papers which we still to this day haven't seen all of publicly. And who do they bring in to look at this but this Trump guy? Okay, now think about it. Let's say John Trump, look at what he did for a living. He was a scientist. Let's say that he was aware, that this Trump that was in the Sonora Aero Club, that Trump might have been involved in this post-Civil War Black Project that I'm talking about. The Trumps. And then when Donald's grandfather actually came over from Germany, you know, a relative. You know, if he's a relative, that's how, you know, his uncle John, you know, could have been brought into the fold of the 1903. Because remember, the guys, this is my theory now, the guys who did this Black Project, post-Civil War Black Project, they were the ones who caused the 1890s airship mystery sightings and stuff. And then that group, in 1903 became the 1903 when they decided to break away. Well, if you had, you know, Trump's in that, John Trump might have been fully aware of the 1903, might have been, you know, connected with them somehow. So he's brought in to look at this stuff. And yeah, what you just said is, and I think this is in the blog post, or is it implied anyway? You know, if he's fronting for the 1903, he of course is not going to want the FBI. You know, maybe at that time the 1903 was still kind of low key. You know, and maybe it was his job to kind of cover up the 1903 or downplay anything that would point to. Well, basically what I'm trying to say, and I'm doing it as clunky as I write sometimes, it's possible that what was in that safe was the documented evidence of Tesla's alleged 1903 airship that went to Mars, or the attempt. Mm-hmm. And the 1903 would want that to remain secret, is what I argue, or propose, I should say. And it might be that if John Trump was expected to hide anything, it would have been that, if we're going, you know, along that line of speculation. And that's my line of thinking. That's right. The reason why I wrote that blog post. One of the reasons. And therefore you would have, that's why, see, there's your pedigree, your genealogy as to how in the heck would the 1903 Breakaway Civilization, and why would they back Donald Trump for president? Well, there you go. We can trace the Trumps, you know, a Trump, a direct relative of his to Tesla in this mysterious situation, and we can connect a Trump to the Sonora Aero Club. So, you know. And
to clarify, the Trump that's associated with the Sonora Aero Club is Homer Trump. Is that correct?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And I don't know if you saw this on Facebook, but somebody shared it and commented, and I don't know if you've seen, but that there, again, this is a show about synchronicity, and a lot of the time media gets involved in so-called predictive programming, or what you would also might call just like an unconscious kind of.
Oh, and the Homer Simpson.
The Homer Simpson thing, yeah. Who's behind? Who's behind? Just to explain, on The Simpsons, years ago, there's a plot line of Trump for president, and Trump's coming down the escalator, and Homer is standing right behind him. Well, what happens in real life is that exact same scene, down to the minutest detail of a person in the crowd dropping their sign. Like, it's just bizarre. But the only thing out of that picture of the real Trump is Homer behind him. So you have this Homer Trump that's in media, speculated, who is missing from the actual picture that we're seeing. So that kind of, to me, is like a synchronicity that almost serves as like a powerful indicator of what's really going on.
Yeah, and don't you love it? I do.
Yeah, I do.
I've been neck deep in this synchronicity stuff for years now, and you know, to the point where a lot of times, you know, unless I'm having a discussion with guys like you that are interested in it, I just won't discuss it, because, you know, either you get it or you don't. Totally. And I'm okay with people not getting it. I kind of crossed a Rubicon back in 2010 for me personally. And 2010 was when I realized I do not have to explain anything to anyone, and I do not have to convince anyone of anything. And I'll tell you, it just it was liberating. You know, if somebody's gonna rail at me or get all, you know, their feathers ruffled over something I say in a book, don't read my books. You know, totally. And you know, I don't care. I honestly don't care. Really, when it gets down to it, you know, I don't care who I convince and who I don't. That's not why I'm writing the books.
I wanted to go back here and ask you about this, just lay out some of my ideas about this Trump phenomenon. And I certainly think Trump was different and interesting, and he was certainly attacked by what I've been calling the oligarchy media.
Right.
I mean, we know who they are. Fortune 500 media was certainly highly against Trump, and unless it was some kind of sophisticated reverse psychology operation, let's just take that for face value for a second. But I think that this idea that NIMSA, certainly had funding from central banks and German banks.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
I was reading in one. Yeah. And, one way to paint this modern world we're in is sort of the central, you hear this narrative also painted out there, but you have the central banks, the BIS, the IMF, and this sort of, cabal of central bankers that want to have this fractional reserve banking all over the world. Right. That's their goal. And it really reminds me a lot of how you just described NIMS earlier in this conversation as the group that was interested in keeping control here.
Yes. Uh-huh.
It also relates to like the Bush-Obama wars, because I think they've been targeted at countries that didn't have the BIS, that didn't run through the Western central banking complex.
Right.
So I guess this is what I'm saying is that we have. It paints a really nice picture that we've sort of been NIMSA controlled in America. Mm-hmm. And now we've got Trump, and the question is will he continue with that vision or not? And the recent appointments, I guess I want to get your idea on this. And I realize there's distinctions and there's nuance, and it's very hard to paint things with a broad brush. But you got some Rothschild bankers, you've got some definitely Goldman Sachs bankers, two Goldman Sachs and one Rothschild, and I think for me, just hearing those connections, these are people that worked in those organizations 10, 20, 30 years. It's like there's a presumption that it's business as usual. And I'm open to having that presumption removed if there's like specific facts, like let's say this individual has repudiated that group or was working inside those banks and now is good, so-called good. But I mean, I just feel like that adds another layer to who Trump might be, who he might be working for. Is he compromised? Right. Is he keeping them close just to kind of, it's very complicated, but I guess it's a red flag for me, just to hear the names of those central bankers. Yeah.
And that's perfectly, understandable too. But what comes to my mind when I see some of these appointments are, that phrase, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. I mean, look how Mitt Romney behaved during the campaign, and here's Trump having dinner with him, and
we were hoping.
What's that?
Oh, we were hoping we'd get to this. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, think about that. Think about the stuff that Romney was saying and doing and actively, And here you are, you're president-elect. Okay, do you want to have that guy out there doing all the stuff he's going to do? Or without supervision, without or maybe having to rely on second and third level sources, or maybe do you want to bring him up close? First of all, what I think Trump has done with the Romney situation is he's neutered him to a degree, because who came to who came bitching along with his tail wagging. Romney's the one. So that right there on that, in that unspoken language of visuals and imagery, he's kind of neutered.
I don't know if we should make dog references with Romney, given the dog on the roof.
The dog on the roof, yeah, that's probably bad. So I think what's going on with the people we see him, and this, possibly with the bankers too. It's like, okay, if you want, during your presidency, these guys are out there, who they're allied to, what they're really about. Okay. You need some guys who know how to do the inside baseball in the financial world, right? So maybe you're killing two birds with one stone by getting the guys who are experts, because, these people are experts, but, get them to where you not only can keep an eye on them, but where you might have a conduit that you can work. I think, and I hope this, I hope I'm not wrong, but I think what's going on is some clever gamesmanship, and I think, let's say I'm right that you've got the 1903 versus NIMSA. Let's say that the 1903 did get involved in this particular election by backing Trump. What you've got is the NIMSA's on notice, so to speak. Okay. Here's another thing, that might, I don't know, this might be another topic we'll get into, down the conversation, but notice that Trump is pushing, and this is one of the things I love, for a manned space program, an aggressive one. I agree, this floating around in orbit, okay, time to take off the jammies and quit drinking the cocoa and go beyond orbit of the little nest here. It's time to go put boots on the ground on planets and pursue the stars and stuff. I firmly believe that.
Was he saying also that, like, trying to say, because as you write in your book, that the Air Force has their own space program going on, as opposed to NASA,
right?
And so
classified, which, by the way, folks, I have my reasons for being convinced that we've landed on Mars.
Sure, yeah.
I
think we all are pretty open to that.
We've had boots on the ground on Mars, is my opinion. So my position.
I think we've had Buzz Aldrin on. I think I looked at the picture of him just recently that Joe Farrell put up on his blog that you probably saw, of him in front of the Russian airplane coming back from.
Yes.
But he's wearing this shirt that says Mars on it. It looks like it looks like someone who just left an amusement park that says, "I survived Cedar Point," or whatever. I just went to Mars. That's basically what the picture. So I'm thinking, Antarctica is, maybe that's where the airport is.
Maybe that might be the launch point.
But it reminds me of the thought, like, wherever you go, there you are. Because going to Mars, I don't know. I don't know how to broach it. I just think we've moved. You brought this up, Walter, and perhaps you and I have slightly different views on it. But you said. Sorry if I'm brutalizing this, but you basically said humans have moved from planet to planet, and this is sort of what we do. And but I'm just wondering, if you sort of think about that in terms of a hologram, if the pattern continues to project, like, I'm looking for a different avenue. I mean, I'm wondering.
Wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah.
One thing I just want to.
Oh, go ahead.
It's along the lines of this. I think we've talked about this before, but it's like, what if everything we know about what we're on as a sphere is wrong? Not that it's flat necessarily, but that the mechanism by which we are embedded in whatever, quote, Earth is. That mechanism is something that's so advanced physics or whatever, such that when you say travel to Mars, that might mean being projected by some technology we have no idea. Mars might not even be a ball that we're literally traveling through space to.
This is where I was trying to get.
Yeah, some space that we're projecting our energy on. I mean, who knows what it could be.
Or the Mars that we look at from this point is not the inhabited Mars.
Yes.
The Mars that you go to. It could be that way it could be that way with the moon too.
Yeah.
Is that the moon that the Apollo 11 astronauts and the ones who I argue landed before them to make sure it could work. The moon that the Apollo program went to is not the moon we see in the sky or the moon we were told that they landed on. It's kind of like that. I like that idea. I'm certainly open to that. And it fits with, going back to the lore, of interdimensionals. Well, there you go. It could be that we are, the ones who came from, the other worlds. It's as Joseph Farrell likes to say, it's a both and. It's another planet, but add the next twist. It's another planet. It's a different planet in another dimension, occupying that space that we know as Mars, but not the Mars we look at from this vantage point.
I think this is a fascinating angle to consider, just because I don't know how to succinctly describe this, but not too long ago I was reading a Carlos Castaneda book that the Don Juan, the indigenous person that Castaneda is deriving his anthropological data from, at one point describes an agglutinating force that is he ends up referring to this as inorganics versus organics, and this they're talking about the light they see within organic things, and then the inorganics things that seem to be operating under a limited sphere. And it made me concerned, or perhaps maybe concerned isn't the right word, but like this sort of bubble that anti-gravity creates makes you sort of like a yeast cell in a body, and it's disconnected from the larger whole.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if rushing to embrace this. I believe this technology exists. I believe it's been covered up for a very long time. Whether the use of it is the solution or not is where this sort of philosophical moment is what I'm trying to dig into. Do you hear what I'm saying, Walter?
When you say this technology exists, specifically what? You're referring to the bubble?
Well, okay, I've heard this as is an emulation technology based on sort of what a bumblebee does. I don't know if you ever heard that one, but where mass is altered and flight, you're not the gravitational drag, you're able to go at tremendous speed because you're
actually moving within a bubble.
Yeah, and
that is kind of an anti-gravity force field around you.
Yeah.
Okay, I want you to. Have you read my book Origin?
No, that is one I have not read yet.
Okay, in that book, you're going to read about a guy named Oliver Heaviside.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, and I think you'll find what Heaviside did very interesting. What I think he contributed, it's the very thing you're talking about, and we're talking in the late 19th century. Ho.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a number of technologies that can get you there. I mean, you've talked about T. Townsend Brown and the B bomber, which I think is like a no-brainer. And I've heard other aviation people saying you could apply that technology to mainstream flight, and the price of tickets would be nothing. And I don't know. The economic structure is not necessarily. I don't know. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, it's interesting. People say, "Well, how are you going to pay for this? How are you going to pay for this?" Remember, what these breakaways do is they bring together the industrialists that already own the resources. This is something I never hear when people are trying to deconstruct this and stuff. I never hear them just simply say, "Well," and I'm just using this as an example. You've got Joe Smith, who has the all-important, Block A resource, and even though Block A is used to build ships and bridges and blah, 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 and it's expensive to, blah, 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 Joe Smith is the guy who produces this Block A, this mysterious, Block A thing I'm coming up with. And if he's part of the breakaway and he owns the resources and he's the wealthy industrialist, he's going to say, okay, if we're going to produce 10 Block A's, 7 of them are going to be for public consumption. 3 of them are going to be for the breakaway. And I'm donating this to the breakaway. You follow me? So I think sometimes we get, now I know money has to be paid for the processes, but I think what they do is they underestimate how the process already in place that's producing the amount of that, whatever that element is, it is really covered by the public consumption and use of that element, and really whatever you're moving over here to the side secretly to be given to the Breakaway, maybe essentially, and I'm using air quotes, cost-free, so to speak. So there may be something that those of us, myself, Joseph, others, who look into the, the financial angle on the Breakaway, it could be that in some ways it's not as expensive as we think. The money could go elsewhere. But going back to what you're talking about, this bubble thing, when you look at Heaviside, you'll look at something, and I talk about it in my book, what he's known for, and that's GEM, G-E-M, gravito-electromagnetism. And with that, he created what you're talking about, the bubble. And that's what I argue in origin Tesla would have applied to his airship so that the guys could leave orbit of this planet, pass through the layers of the atmosphere and journey to Mars or wherever, because they had used this Heaviside concepts, that Tesla put on steroids, and it was the protective shell around this airship. This is what I argue in origin or propose.
See, Walter, I think one of the first places I ever heard your voice was on Carrie Cassidy's radio program, and she interviewed a guy named Ralph Ring a long time ago, who was the first person I ever heard offer up this, an emulated technology that's appears in nature and is used by the Bumblebee. Now, Ralph Ring supposedly had a connection to Tesla via I'm blanking on the guy's name. I'm sure you might remember. Otis T. Carr.
Oh yeah, Otis Carr. Okay.
Otis Carr. So who supposedly was a understudy of Tesla. So Ralph Ring might be tracing this lineage of that. But yeah. I'm curious of what the philosophical position of people who used this had as it related to themselves or the planet they were on, because this might be an indication of their larger perception of reality. That's pretty far out. I mean, it's pretty far deep to get to that, but without, I don't know.
Well, I think that's great. That's a totally valid thing to say, and that's something I remember writing about in one of my blog posts. Of that, the whole concept of anti-gravity as opposed to gravity, and this is something I talked about with Mark Leclerc a long time ago, that the whole idea, the discovery of gravity by Newton, is itself this sort of myth of regardless of its actual being true, but that it's basically a recreation of the fall in the garden, where what is the detail of the story? You have an apple, you have a tree, you have a fall, and you have Newton, who is Newt, which implies the sort of the snake element, and in a way that's sort of like two totally opposite philosophical positions, where gravity, or the belief in gravity, which I should add that I think a lot of people don't even believe in gravity, like the electric universe people, but that it is sort of a limiting sort of perspective, where we all believe that we're stuck on this thing because of this supernatural force, whereas something like anti-gravity, it would be the opposite of that, which is total freedom. So I like that. I think that's
interesting.
Credit good old Mark.
Yeah, I can peep that. Yeah,
but it could be, that doesn't mean gravity bad, anti-gravity good. It could mean that whoever is
it just is.
Yeah.
It's like electricity is. You can use it for great, wonderful, positive, constructive things. You can also use it for destructive purposes. It just is.
Totally.
But what's interesting, what you're talking about there is, the when you said, it's liberating to realize that we are not slaves to this, gravity control. What I thought of was Peter Menace, the German fellow who started the Sonora Aero Club. He had discovered the secret to what we call anti-gravity, and we have to acknowledge we might be misidentifying really what it is going on, but we have to use the nomenclature that most people can grasp. But Peter Menace, he had learned discovered or learned one way or the other about this, and he was essentially, yeah, he was liberated by it, because not even the Prussian, controllers of that Prussian branch of the NIMSA could really tell him what to do, and they were the parent organization that was initially backing the Sonora Aero Club. But Menace knew what he knew liberated him and freed him from their control. And you take it to the next levels, and you end up with, as I say, the 1903. They realized what they had, and they said, And think about it. We looked at this theme of these guys don't want to do this for warfare. Part of why I argue the 1903 broke away is they saw the direction the 20th century was going, and they did not like it. The direction that the bankers and the Marxists and the elitists were pushing the century, and they said no, and that might be why they said we're taking what we got and we're going. And of course, if they really did go to Mars, they could have found something there. I propose that was the Rubicon for them, where they said, oh heck no, we're not putting this back in the hands of those people back there. We're gonna do our own thing, and there you go. Whatever happened after that,
it might be a case of the sort of a tired, cliched story, but it might be the actual truth of the matter. Is that as a species or whatever, we're not ready, or that we've been in this state of warfare and then all the different factions of the alternative community like to say,
the whole
ascension, we're ready to ascend, but I hate that,
yeah,
but I feel like there might be some grain.
The we're not worthy philosophy. Yeah, I despise that too. I've often said, I say it publicly, and anytime I'm given the opportunity, like you are now giving me, I say, these people that are in awe of ET,
right.
Okay, oh, they must be so much more. They must be so much more advanced than us, and of course, they've conquered their warring nature, and they must be dedicated to peace because they have advanced technology. Meanwhile, every piece of historical evidence points to the majority of technological advancements had everything to do with war, And I ask this question: what makes these people really think that these ETs, these people from other worlds, are so different from us? I argue that they're not. I argue that there's nothing to do with are we worthy or not. You know what? You figure stuff out and you get your hands on it when you figure it out and when you get your hands on it. And all this hand-wringing over the morality of it, blah, 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 that is what you deal with as you go along. But, you get your hands on it when you get your hands on it. And of course, what you do with it says a lot about, the philosophy of your civilization, right? Of course it does. And the human character and stuff. But this business that, we're not worthy, you know what? Things are going to happen when they're going to happen. And the hand wringers are always going to be there. They have an agenda.
Oh, totally.
And, and when you're on to it, that's how you begin to just disregard their crap. This is why I'm in love with the idea of, I've been saying this for years, my people close to me will tell you, I've been saying this for years, that it's very important, and I'm going to be writing about this. There's a little hint of an upcoming book. The future of the world and of, the United States in particular, I'm going to say the American people and our thing is reliant upon us venturing out into space and going forth into this new frontier. I love it when people say, what the hell happened to us? We were doing this go forth, and now we've been, diddling around with petri dishes in orbit. Okay, great. Let's take it's time to do something more. It's essential. And we can't let the namby-pams who are constantly second-guessing themselves and society in general, to hold everyone else back because of their inordinate fear. just kind of get out of the way and let the rest of us who want to go and do.
Sure.
That's my philosophy.
Well, you mentioned, Walter, the low orbit. That it seems like most of our activity has been, at least the verifiable stuff, we're basically just Earth orbit up there. It's really not even space. Have you read the Dave McGowan Wagging the Moondoggie, that series of essays that he wrote?
No.
Oh, it's fast. It's a really great, persuasive just case that basically the moon landing as it was sold to us couldn't have happened or didn't happen. And I just think, hearing what we talked about earlier, that if we were filming a moon that's not the moon we're looking at, then that's a nice, elegant solution to the people that said we didn't go and the people that said we did go. Well, what if we went to something in a way that we, that allows for the...
Oh, I do want to throw in here too that while I'm saying, we've been spending all this time in orbit, I'm talking about that public program and how it affects the general public. The general public needs to be actively invested and involved again in manned space travel, because all this time I do believe our military has a manned space program going out there, but that's classified. And, I'm saying what we need to do is be open about this endeavor again and have the general public invested in it openly again. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Gary McKinnon, there's a lot of things to point out where we can peer slightly at what that might look like. And I do appreciate that you're mostly focusing on the Air Force data rather than this sort of secondary layer that is the Nazis that have been involved in the NASA thing. I mean, the Von Karman auditorium at JPL after, and Von Braun, but you don't hear about the other ones that have been infiltrated to other portions of the Air Force and Navy and such. I kept waiting for the specter of L. Ron Hubbard to appear in the book, and it was funny that we eventually got there because
I wanted to bring that up. I really wanted to get to that at some point. Is getting back to the book also as a just mission of this little conversation that about Roswell is that you have a really unique kind of take on that whole scenario involving which it's the first in any case it's the first time I had seen it that the so-called Majestic 12 documents and the Roswell story itself might have been a smokescreen of some kind for the government's interest in whatever Jack Parsons was up to in the desert of New Mexico. And of course we know, it all just kind of falls into place very nicely for me because of Parsons' history.
You're referring to that Parsons telling the FBI that he thought that he had opened a doorway.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, and that the first time I'd read that was, my source on that was Nick Redfern's book, Final Events, and then of course, I looked at other source material on Parsons, and that is a very intriguing little anecdote there, a little story in Parsons.
It kind of just makes the whole thing make sense because of L. Ron Hubbard. His presence there is just it's so bizarre. It doesn't.
If he was a naval intelligence officer, who was, and this is how this works. It's like, who do we got that can get close to this guy? Oh, we got Hubbard over here who's really into this wacky stuff and can get close to Parsons. Hell yeah, okay, he's our guy. That's how it works. Mm-hmm. People say, oh, that's convoluted. No, I'm telling you, I've run these kind of ops. I'm telling you, you look at your assets and you go, who do we got? Do we have anybody in place? And if you don't have anybody in place among the ranks, then you go recruit. If you don't have what's called an agent, you go recruit an asset. And, but if you've got the person who's already in your intel ranks, who's got the bona fides to get close to that person, that's exactly what you do. So for me, the L. Ron Hubbard as intelligence officer working Parsons, to me, coming from my perspective, that makes a lot of sense. It resonates.
Oh, yeah. Hey, go ahead.
Well, there's just so many other aspects to that whole story involving Hubbard making off with Parsons' boat, and then Parsons
and his girlfriend
and his money, and Parsons coming and conjuring basically invoking a rainstorm that Peter Lavender writes about, and the Scarlet Woman going back to Crowley, which kind of brings us all full circle. And Marjorie Cameron, who appears to him out of nowhere, basically, which is another example of these both and stories where that could have been a magical occurrence, or it could have been a further layer of this sort of working
operation.
Him. Where Hubbard's like, oh, this guy, he's like really obsessed with this. He really wants a redheaded squeeze to come into his life. So who do we got in Hollywood that's gonna do it?
Exactly.
It seems possible.
Or who do we got that we can inject into Hollywood? Or who do we have? Whatever. You look at what you got, and it's.
Walter, I was going to ask you if there was a direct connection. I don't remember if this was talked about in your first Empire of the Wheel book, but a connection from some of the spiritualist movement of the late 1800s, early 1900s to Scientology. Like, did those feed into one another at any point?
I wouldn't be surprised if you found something, but I haven't looked into that specifically. So, there could be, but I've never had any reason to look at that yet, so I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, you got to look at what Hubbard was into, and he certainly borrowed from different disciplines, creating Scientology or developing it.
Well, a person who's hosted on this show quite a bit, David Plate, has argued that some of the introductory personality tests and stuff is looking for people that are easy to hypnotize or more susceptible to hypnotize, which crossed over in some information
That's interesting.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Oh, going back to Hubbard real quick. Now that you bring stuff up. I don't know how. I think it was through my niece or nephew or something. I came into a stack of books about the life of L. Ron Hubbard. They're kind of like Time Life book format. And come to think of it, he did in his younger days have connections to, and the books are in another room. I'd have to go dig it out. But there is a connection to those circles that would have included spiritualists and stuff like that. So again, if I wanted to dig into that, I wouldn't be surprised if you said there's a spiritualist connection to Hubbard, or at least someone he knew. What's coming to mind off the top of my head is that someone connected with him died on the Lusitania or something like that. And of course, I wrote about the Lusitania in Empire of the Wheel 1. So yeah, it's coming to the surface. I just haven't looked at that material in a while, but anyway, I just wanted to throw that in.
Didn't you make reference to somebody being busted for picking up young people off of Hollywood Boulevard?
The Wineville chicken coop murder. Which, Clint Eastwood, his film Changeling, is about that.
Yeah.
Gordon Northcott, who over here in what's called Miraloma now, and it was Wineville, and they changed the city name, the town name, to Miraloma because of these murders, this murder case. They wanted to kind of erase the history. The original property is still there, by the way. But yeah, Gordon Northcott, he was picking up young boys on Valley Boulevard between Fontana and clear out in Pomona, and doing horrible things to them. And when he was arrested, initially, when he was first brought in, he was nervous and scared, and he told the authorities that first had him that he had been abducting these boys for very wealthy and powerful men in Riverside, California, and when they were done doing what they wanted to do with them, they would give them to him to dispose of.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and then subsequently he changed his tune on that.
Mm.
And I suspect somebody got to him. Now, when it's the 1920s and you're going to dance on a rope, it's curious how anybody could get to you. Hey, we'll kill you. Well, you're going to die anyway. So there's some little details in how they could threaten a guy who probably knows he's going to die anyway. But the circumstances and the facts suggest that he initially spilled the beans about some dark, nefarious things going on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that kind of... before I move on, I want to say we're hitting 2 hours, and I just want to make sure that time-wise, how you're doing, if you are ready to conclude. There's no real time limit on this. So if you're down to continue and everyone else is, we can continue. I just want to make sure that you're okay.
Yeah, I can go a little bit longer. And
Okay.
Can I take a latrine break?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, be right back.
I don't know, that part of it I can't really talk about. I can't discuss it, it's just too personal. Sorry.
I'm back.
Cool.
I had to throw a load of laundry in too because a niece of mine's getting married tomorrow, and I got to go into L.A. and go to that, and I had to do some laundry. So
that sounds festive.
Yeah, Walter, I lived in LA for the last 10 years and moved to Iowa not too long ago. So there's some LA stuff that I'd love to run by you after the show, but
I'll tell you, Greg Bishop is more because he actually lives in LA. I'm not an LA guy, so
you're a Redlands man, are you not?
Inland, yeah. I live in Highland, which is just north on the other side of the freeway from Redlands.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah.
But I spent a lot of time in Redlands. So,
so
where are we at?
Where were we?
So, yeah, I want to jump in. This is a question we were thinking about earlier, talking about, and it relates to Scientology, MKUltra. But basically, there's this idea that MKUltra is designed to kind of open up the human personality, so that there can be a breakdown, I guess, to normal functioning. Some people theorize it's so that other entities might be able to come into the body and inhabit it, whether that's interdimensional entities, demonic, whatever, or other people theorize it's to open it up for like the psychic driving that Dr. Cameron did.
Mm-hmm.
And so that you basically replace a personality with some other personality through a hollowing out process.
Right.
But it relates to Scientology because this is there's some stuff going around that, as you get up higher into the levels with things like Thetans and other I guess, techniques that basically people are theorizing this is the purpose of Scientology through the breaking down techniques, that it's very similar to MKUltra, with the final upshot as being taking over a human being psyche with this other force that I just described. Is there anything like that you've seen? I mean, in terms of like your father having a cover story, I mean, it kind of relates in some ways, but in all your research, I mean, in all the areas you've ever researched, where are you at with like interdimensional entities, possession, sort of breaking down a personality and reprogramming it? I mean, that's very broad, but
that's
any thoughts? Or?
Yeah, that's a big conversation there. Entities, first of all, yeah, I personally, I think entities exist. I'm a believer in that. And yeah, I think possession can and does occur. Not always in spectacularly horrific ways like we see, in demonic possession, particularly as portrayed in films, although that certainly goes on, I think. I have been convinced, that's the way I like to put it, is I've been convinced, others don't need to be. If that's not their thing. I would think that, yeah, when you're playing around with these MKUltra tools, that you indeed could, for instance, Colonel Lundy told me that there are some distinct dangers with that, with just simple meditation. So it's you're in that realm when you're fooling around with hypnotism and psychic driving and trying to put layers in there, because again, it's like you said, you're opening that up, you're making this clean slate, or you're finding you're finding a tesseract within the psyche of that individual, and you're wanting to grow something there, or plant something in there that will grow, that you ideally, are the one who controls when it manifests. And when you start doing things like that, who knows what else could slip in? Who knows what else was already there? And what you've done is it's awakened because you've played with these things. It can get convoluted and very murky, and it can get scary. One of the things that scares the hell out of me is demonic possession. That's something that and Colonel Lundy, that used to drive him nuts. He would say, you got to get over because he taught me some things that are in that strange world, and he said, look, you've got to learn this stuff. And some of it, quite frankly, had the potential of what we're talking about here. And yeah, it scared the hell out of me. But he used to tell me, that was because my dad took me to see too many horror movies. But then at the same time, he would turn around and say, but there are frightening things in that realm. It's like, well, which is it? Kind of like my book.
I liked, by the way, one of my favorite parts was when you described, you didn't want to do the hallucinogens, but then you took the Brazilian plant.
I didn't. Brazilian plant. I was drinking a damn energy drink.
That's what I mean. No, that's what I mean. I see it all over town. No, we've got the drinks here. They actually advertised under the name of that plant. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's like.
Oh no, the drink was just a simple. I thought I'd identified it in the book. It's just the. Gosh darn it!
Started with
it's one of the popular. If you were to say it, I'd go, yeah, that's it.
Like Monster
yeah, no, not Monster. It's been around. What's that?
Red Bull?
No, not Red Bull, not Monster. It's been around for gosh darn it! I'm doing a brain dump. I see it in my head. Anyway, it's just something you can buy at 7-Eleven or any mini mart, Arco, AMPM mini mart.
Rockstar.
No, it wasn't Rockstar. You'll hit on it, we'll get it. But it's just one of those. It's just a damn energy drink. It was the blueberry flavored. I love the darn thing, and it worked. It would inject that amount of energy I needed. So I was doing 2 of them a day, and boy, I hit the 2-week mark, and it was the guarana inside that.
Guarana, yeah.
Guarana, that's the stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the ingredient that was doing it. Yeah. Full throttle. I believe
full
it was
throttle. Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, it was full throttle.
Full throttle. Okay, yeah, I see it there. Yeah, but I mean, like the MKUltra they used, I mean, the LSD, as you talked about in the book, and it's just, that's part of the whole thing. Let's try these drugs out on people, see how we can get responses,
Yeah.
So anyhow, that was one of my big questions that I just wanted to get your take on. I think Dennis, did you have something else? Was there?
Yeah. I think I discussed a number of things. I remember what I was. Okay. The grandson of Aleister Crowley, Nathan Crowley, being the production designer on a number of big movies, particularly something that we've been discussing quite a bit. I don't know if you've been following Westworld at all.
Series, no.
Yeah. Well, your description in the book of having memories erased and deleted or reprogrammed or repatterned is the expression you used at one point that I thought was really nice. But that's one of the subplots of Westworld, where at one point they can take away bad memories of the host people within there to prevent their anguish of experiencing that. Yeah, it seemed, I just was curious but also the Nathan Crowley connection. It's like a working that is extended beyond the screen of the picture, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm curious of how that rings through in generations of people. Like, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on how the specter of Aleister Crowley, Spence, and how he appears? It's
interesting. I had the same experience with Hecate as I have had with Aleister Crowley, and that is, the more I looked at Crowley, the more I learned about Crowley. The more, I don't know if you want to say admire is the word, but the less I saw him as some, dark, evil bugaboo guy that so many people have, bought into that. And he greatly cultivated that, let's be honest. But, here's the interesting thing. I asked Colonel Lundy years ago about Crowley, and he surprised the hell out of me.
I remember you mentioned that previously one time.
Yeah, he said, Crowley was a genius. Crowley was absolutely a genius. And we never took the opportunity or never got the opportunity to, flesh out a conversation about Crowley. But, I figured, okay, well, if that flavored my approach to Aleister Crowley. So that when here I had him popping up in my Empire of the Wheel stuff, when I looked at him, I didn't just totally go with here's this, this dark, creepy figure, weirdo guy. I went about him objectively, and what I found, the stuff you hear people say, he killed babies, he most certainly did not. A researcher that's a very, very good friend, okay, who has helped me with some stuff, he sees Aleister Crowley as the devil incarnate, and he thinks he insists that Aleister Crowley was the architect and mastermind behind the San Bernardino working that I write about. And I stand firm that not only was he not that he was vehemently opposed to it. Yeah. But I can't convince actually a couple of guys I know otherwise. They buy into the.
It's sort of a matter of record that he was very much opposed to what Jack Parsons was doing.
Yeah.
So,
that's
what it's worth.
Crowley. So that that's my and I came. When I went into it on researching Hecate, what I knew was the dark goddess of the witches, and boy, do do I have a completely different position on Hecate since then? That's a subject of another show entirely, but as to the extent that I'd be willing to talk about it publicly, which I'm not. So, it's interesting. I didn't know that he had a grandson, of all things in cinematic arts.
Very high profile.
He did the Dark Knight, the Christopher Nolan films.
Oh, cool. Okay.
He's worked on a lot of the Christopher Nolan movies, yeah.
And
what does he think of Alistair? Has he ever said publicly?
No, he's not he doesn't speak out publicly. He's just listed in the credits. He's kind of
he's an art director is what he is.
Yeah.
Production design, yeah. And art director, production design.
That's interesting.
This is an interesting, and always. Go ahead, Dennis. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that the writer. I've talked to David Goyer, the writer of the Batman movies, and he wasn't aware of Sandy Hook being on the map in The Dark Knight, and he had made reference that a production person may have made that choice. So I'm just throwing that out there. Yeah,
that's very significant, I would say. What were you going to say, Jay?
I was just curious, Walter, as a quick 9/11. I mean, it always comes up, and it's a hot button topic. So speak however you'd like to speak on it. But NIMSA seems like it could have been involved. I know Joseph Farrell has an idea that the Nazi International were.
Have you read my blog post on 9/11?
I've never read your blog post. I mean, I'd love to. So is it?
Basically, the answer to your question is there.
Okay. I'm going to just type into Google. Walter
and I'm not
Bosley
saying that because I don't want to tell you, but I've already gone into that extensively.
Okay.
And I think you'll probably find your answer there.
Okay, wonderful. No, that's all.
Well, and you had mentioned a financier of NIMSA. I think it was Carl Keller being the founder of the OTO. And I think OTO symbolisms has been fleshed out by David Plate as it relates to 9/11. So it could be there. But I don't know if I've read that blog post either. So
yeah, I haven't either. I'd like to read that.
Yeah, if it's not it might be the first one I did, but it's one of the early ones, and it was retitled at one point. But it's a touch of magic. If you go back to the first year of blog posts, which I think was just 2 years ago or whatever.
I got February 22nd, 2015, 9/11, a touch of magic.
It was just last year. Yeah. You know what? Here's the thing. I had talked about this with Joseph Farrell in our late night conversations for a couple of years, and then I finally decided to go balls out and post it on the blog last year.
I'm going to send a link to you guys with this blog post right now so we can all check it out. Yeah, thanks, Walter. No, I just, it's kind of the biggest issue of our time in terms of the psychology of the collective. It's pre 9/11, post 9/11, and I imagine that, certainly some of that could be an accident or just the chance of fate or something.
Well, to give the short answer so people know what we're talking about with the blog, to answer your question, absolutely, I think that 9/11 was an act of the NIMSA. The NIMSA-backed Nazi International that Joseph speaks about, and more, and it's there.
So.
Right.
Maybe we were joking while you were gone, Walter, that I couldn't get through a podcast without mentioning the name Stanley Kubrick. And,
yes.
And I don't know if you remember. I don't know if you remember this, but I know you commented on one of my articles that I wrote about Kubrick's death and 666 days before.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. That's sort of a lot of that kind of research is what takes up a lot of my time. And there's a few stunners that I want to throw at you, which just sort of kind of proved to me that somehow Stanley Kubrick is at the center of everything. But
it's interesting that you bring this up now because I'm in the middle of reading Jay Dyer's Esoteric Hollywood.
Oh, right, yeah.
He goes into his analysis of the Kubrick stuff, so this is great timing because my mind is on it. So go ahead.
Good, yeah. Well, okay, it actually relates to Trump because The matriarch of the Trump family is Elizabeth Trump. Elizabeth Christ Trump, or Christ, I guess. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Which that name blows me away, first of all. But if you look at her lifespan, she died. Well, she was born October 10th, 1880, and she died on June 6th, 1966. Which, if you write that out, will be 6666.
Oh, yeah.
Which was like, that in itself
Great.
to me was unbelievable. But then I went ahead and said, okay, how long after that day did the film 2001: A Space Odyssey come out?
No.
And you probably have guessed it already, but it came out exactly 666 days after 6666.
Oh, you gotta love that crap.
Isn't it? It's too perfect.
And think about it, 2001: A Space Odyssey is about everything that it's about. And here we have, I'm thinking, oh, you think the Trumps are connected to the 1903? And,
Yeah.
There's Kubrick saying, yeah, you're just figuring this out now, dummy.
Totally. Couldn't agree more. And you were going back, we went in our discussion of technology and how technology is from the beginning, technology has precipitated sort of violence. That's what the whole opening of 2001 is about.
Yeah.
The bone turns into the spaceship, which is used as the murder weapon. So that was a stunner. But then there's another thing which relates to your book, is because of this date, July 26, 1947, which was the day the National Security Act was signed by Harry Truman, which created our modern-day military-industrial complex, essentially. But July 26th is Kubrick's birthday. So he turned 19 on that day. Another fact about that day, which I have to give credit to my friend Sean Montgomery for, is that on July 26, 1947, the day Truman signed that act, his mother died on that day. Harry Truman's mother died the same day he signed the National Security Act, which is just a strange thing. But then the last part of this little thing, which I won't go too long on it, but that and it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about how you were going to be, you're a huge film buff and you were going to be a film person. And for me, the relationship of cinema to history is just so fraught with synchronicity, and it's just completely intertwined. And so what I like to do is look at these dates and say, what movies came out on that day? And the interesting thing that happened on July 26, 1947, which again was Kubrick's birthday, the day Truman's mother died, the day we signed the National Security Act, was a movie came out called Possessed.
Hitchcock.
It's not Hitchcock.
Oh no, that's right.
It is Curtis Bernhard directed it, but it has Joan Crawford in it. And I won't go into the details, but if you watch Possessed with Kubrick in mind, there's just a ton of just unbelievable correlations and synchronicities. But that, for me, just that word possessed was coming to mind before when we were talking about the subject of possession and demonic possession, and the whole kind of concept that the military-industrial complex sort of, in a way, possessed the country.
America.
Yeah. So on the day that was signed, this movie comes out called Possessed. And, demonic possession seems to be a big theme. And I don't know if you read, do you know Tracy Twyman at all?
Yeah.
Yeah, she had a recent article which was kind of sort of speculating about Hillary Clinton, that she was somehow, might have been the moon child created because she was born in October of 47.
That's her birthday, October of 47?
October 26, 47. So that's just 4 months later.
October 26, 1947. There's an interesting there's a synchronicity with Houdini, because I believe it was October of 26 that he was, I say murdered. I'm a believer in the murdered theory, but Wow. And then Houdini's connected to the, a bunch of, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
See, that's what I'm glad you mentioned that, Walter, because that is one of the things that I'm the Houdini connection, and that whole story is really wonderful in your book. And yeah, okay.
And it's there, so.
And so, just to sort of finish the whole idea that if indeed this ridiculous on the face of it scenario is, and that Hillary Clinton is somehow representative of this demonic possessed madness, that the so-called 1903 that this election of Trump was a defeat of that that entity.
It would be. Yeah, you could say that.
And I don't know. To me,
and this brings up something. What you're saying there. Here's the thing. Remember, a lot of people, most of the people who support him, they'll be the first to tell you, oh, he's not perfect.
Right.
Oh, yeah, we're going to keep our eye out, we're going to hold him to the same standard, blah, 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 blah. It was just as important what was being that it was opposing that whole thing, what it was opposing. Yes, her, but also what she represents, and also putting an end on that. Think about it. The post-Reagan, up till, Obama, just that oligarchy, whatever you want to call it, that whole political path that our country's been on with the two Bushes, Bill Clinton and Obama, and then Hillary just wanted to, continue it. No, that had to come to an end. And, and I think that aspect was just as important as any other aspects, so all the angst that's going on, I got a stone cold heart on that, because the way I view what's going on is different than some folks would paint, because I don't think they haven't stepped out and they're not looking at a bigger picture or from a particular point of view, so.
Right on.
Yeah, for me, there was a hypocrisy that was exposed, that the Trump victory was good, just on the grounds that it exposed this kind of liberal hypocrisy, is what I'll describe it as, or
sure,
maybe liberal is the wrong term, but defending the 7 wars in 7 years or whatever. It's like they went from resisting the imperialism or the war machine under Bush, and then as soon as the blue flag started flying, they were actually actively defending and justifying that aggression. Yeah. And to expose that, I wanted, these people needed their bubble burst because it was a terrible bubble.
Yeah, exactly. A terrible bubble. And now, this is why I say now we are finally beginning the 21st century. The last 16 years we've been finishing up the 20th century. And, we're finally beginning the 21st century. And
I like that.
To me, it's exciting, and nothing's perfect. But who the hell, if you stood there and stomped your foot and you demanded perfection, you'd go nowhere in life. The world would go nowhere. These people, I am very much opposed to the idea of utopias. I can't stand a utopianist. Somebody who's who's into utopia. We can make this world perfect. Oh, BS. Because guess what? The world and the reality is exactly what it's supposed to be. Okay, with all its negatives along with the positives. Why? Because this is my view. The world and this reality we live in, the purpose of it is not what you're going to do to the world so much. It's it's how you conduct yourself. Okay, it's a machine for improving your own character. So these negatives have to be there, because really the test is not you being able to make a utopia by eradicating all the negatives. You're not going to do that. First of all, it's a wet dream. But really, it's all about how you react and respond to things and what you do. It's instead of trying to make the world perfect. Why, I say to people, why don't you just focus on making yourself a better human being, and that'll keep your plate loaded for your entire life, and stop trying to make the world perfect. And the irony there is, if we all focused on trying to make ourselves better, then by, I don't want to say by accident, but the result would be a better world. You follow me? So instead of trying to enforce an external agenda on the world around you, enforce your little agenda on yourself, and you'll be a better person, and then we'll have more better people, and then the world, by default will get better.
Thanks for listening to this broadcast from SyncBook Radio. If you'd like to know more about our guest, Walter Bosley, he can be found at his website, empireofthewheel.blogspot.com. There you can read his latest posts, find links to buy his various books in Kindle and print editions, or make a donation. If you enjoyed this broadcast, there's much more content waiting for you at thesyncbook.com. New episodes are always free, and members get access to our full archive of over 600 hours. You'll find all of this, as well as our books and videos, at thesyncbook.com.